Macron faces $4.9 trillion in reparations demands as Africa's former colonies unite, and France's fiscal house is built on sand. On May 10, 2026, Emmanuel Macron walked into a problem he can't solve with a speech. Caribbean leaders and African governments were demanding something French presidents have spent 2 centuries dodging: formal talks on reparations for slavery and colonial rule. And this time, the pressure had teeth. For the ordinary French taxpayer, that question lands hard. France is already running a deficit north of 5% of GDP. The country borrows roughly 100 billion euros every year just to keep the lights on. If Paris is forced to acknowledge a debt it owes to its former colonies, even a fraction of what's being claimed, it could blow the national budget apart. So Macron's choice is brutal. Open the door, and you risk a fiscal crisis that hits pensions and public services at home. Slam it shut, and you accelerate the slow-motion eviction of France from the continent its empire was built on. This is the trap, and we'll see exactly how it was set, who is closing it, and why the markets are already pricing the worst-case outcome. Because the story of how Paris ended up here starts with a single island. That island was Saint-Domingue, what we now call Haiti. In the 18th century, it was the most profitable colony on Earth. A single French sugar island, worked by enslaved Africans, that earned more for Paris than entire continents earned for rival empires. The wealth was staggering. Saint-Domingue's plantations supplied a huge share of the sugar and coffee Europe drank. The money poured into Bordeaux's docks and Nantes' trading houses, the merchant fortunes that bankrolled French industry for generations. Every franc of it ran on the labor of hundreds of thousands of enslaved people, dying faster than the ships could replace them. And here is the part that still rots at the foundation of modern France. When Haiti broke free in 1804, Paris didn't accept the loss. A French fleet returned and demanded an indemnity payment in gold francs to compensate the former slave owners for their lost property. The property being human beings. Some analysts suggest Haiti spent more than a century paying that debt off, with a modern value running into the tens of billions. That is the bill no French president has ever cleared. And in 2026, it has come back with company. The first government to drag that ledger into the open was Caribbean. December 2023, London. Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, stood in front of a British audience and put a number on the bill: $4.9 trillion. That's what she demanded former slave-owning nations, including the UK, pay her region in reparations for the slave trade. To get a sense of scale, $4.9 trillion is bigger than the entire annual economic output of Germany. It is more than double France's whole national budget. Motley wasn't filing a court case. She was setting a price. And she had momentum. The Church of England had already put up £100 million, about $125 million, as reparations for its own historical role in slavery. King Charles, in a June 2022 speech, said Britain needed to find new ways to acknowledge its part in the slave trade. He didn't promise money, but he opened the door. Motley walked through it. And once one Caribbean leader names a $1 trillion figure for slavery reparations, every other former colony does the math, including the ones France used to own. And France still owns more than people realize. 15 African nations remain locked into the CFA franc, a colonial-era currency Paris created in 1945. The arrangement requires those countries to park between 20 and 50% of their foreign reserves with the French Treasury. The wealth flows north. The control stays in Paris, and the bill for ending it keeps growing. That bill is being collected fastest in the Sahel, the band of states stretching across West and Central Africa where French troops once moved freely. Today, they don't move at all. In a span of barely 3 years, military juntas seized power in Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Niger. Every one of them rose on an explicitly anti-French platform. The new governments tore up defense agreements and expelled French ambassadors. Within months, French troops were ordered home. Macron tried to slow the bleeding by pulling forces from Chad and Senegal voluntarily, hoping to look like a partner instead of a colonizer in retreat. It didn't work. For the people on the ground, the change is concrete. French companies that ran hydrocarbons, mining, construction, and telecom contracts across Francophone Africa are watching their dominance shrink. The commercial footprint Paris spent 6 decades building is dissolving on a calendar measured in months. This is the worst hand France has held in Africa since the empire collapsed. And the worst part, the markets have already noticed. The bond traders are pricing the new reality before the politicians have admitted it. And here's what those bond traders saw. French sovereign yields stayed elevated throughout 2025, averaging 3.4%. They spiked near 3.5% in January after political turmoil, eased briefly when the budget passed in February, then climbed right back by September as deficit talks collapsed. The pattern is the alarm bell. France can't shrink its debt today, let alone absorb a new one. While Paris bleeds out, Beijing is moving in. Chinese investment across Africa has surged. Ports, railways, fiber optic networks, and lithium and cobalt mines wired straight into the supply chains, powering electric vehicles and smartphones. For a continent that spent 60 years dealing with a former colonial ruler still calling the shots, Chinese capital arrived without the political strings attached to French aid. The math is brutal for France. French firms used to be the default partner for Francophone African governments looking to build a road or finance a refinery. Now they bid against Chinese state-backed consortiums that can outprice them on day one and stay patient on returns. The commercial influence Paris took decades to build is being undercut contract after contract. There's a Russian wedge too. The Wagner Group and its successors moved into the same Sahel countries the juntas seized, selling security, mining concessions, and political muscle to governments that just kicked France out. For Western viewers, that matters because the strategic vacuum that opens in West Africa doesn't sit empty. It gets filled, and the fillers don't share Paris's interests in democracy or climate policy. Which brings us back to Macron in May 2026, staring at a problem with no clean exit. If he opens formal talks on reparations, he gives every Caribbean and African government a legal hook to pursue claims that could run into the hundreds of billions. With French yields already pricing fiscal stress at 3.5% and the deficit refusing to shrink, even a partial settlement could tip Paris into a debt crisis the Eurozone has been bracing against since the Greek collapse. If he refuses to talk, the African governments still inside the French orbit have every reason to follow Mali and Niger out the door. Beijing is waiting with cheaper terms. Moscow is waiting with cheaper weapons. And the CFA franc, the last serious lever Paris holds, becomes politically impossible to defend. This is what makes the moment historic. A French empire that grew rich on Caribbean sugar 3 centuries ago, kept alive in the 1900s by African reserves the French Treasury still controls, is being unwound layer by layer. Macron is the president who happened to be in the chair when the bill came due. And the bill is no longer something France can outrun. If Macron capitulates, Europe's debt crisis deepens. If he refuses, France loses Africa forever. The century of exploitation comes due. Like, share, and subscribe for stories the mainstream misses. See you tomorrow.